Hello and welcome to a very special Christmas edition of Perfect Night In. Today's guest is the writer Jon Dear, who is currently writing a book on the BBC's Ghost Stories for Christmas. And if you enjoy this podcast and want to know more, Jon is hosting an online event this Monday, the 23rd of December, discussing that very subject. Event details are available in the show notes where you get your podcast. And without any further ado, let's go and meet him. Merry Christmas, Jon.
Merry Christmas, Neil. It's very nice to be here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to share your perfect Christmas night in with us. And before we get started, can you paint a picture of where this perfect Christmas night in is taking place?
We are in a small village in southwest Norfolk. We're in my mum's cottage. We're in the lounge. It's quite dark and it's Christmas Eve. Everything I've chosen tonight has either been made for Christmas or, with one exception, re-edited for Christmas. So it's very specifically Christmas Eve. Now, on Christmas Eve, we always go to the east coast of Norfolk, and my wife and I go to Waxham and Horsey to see the grey seals, which have just been born. And that's the same beach where Michael Hordern is threatened by Lynn in Jonathan Miller's Whistle and I'll Come to You. And then afterwards, we'll make a way a few miles upwards to Haysborough, which is spelt Happysburg, if you ever see it on the map, which has a spectacularly unreconstructed pub where I'll go in for Christmas Eve. And that's where the church scenes were filmed for Lawrence Gordon Clark's Ghost Story for Christmas, A Warning to the Curious. And then we'll come back, we'll start cooking. We'll have a few things on the go for lunch tomorrow, pour a drink, and then sit down for an evening's telly. And just for this one infinitesimal moment, all is right with the world. Of course it's not, but this is just a moment I can pretend. And anticipation is always better than reality. It's also the flip side of anxiety. When you fear something, you're anxious about it, it's generally the build-up to it. And it's always worse in your head 99% of the time than whatever actually happens. But the flip side is also true. If you really look forward to something, the anticipation is generally better. So I always prefer Christmas Eve to Christmas Day, because then it's over and you're on the downward spiral. But here's just the ultimate moment of anticipation.
Well, you can tell it's Christmas because we're starting this perfect night in earlier than we've ever started one before. It's 5 p.m. and your first choice is... Okay, Jon, for your first choice, it's Christmas 1993. Talk us through it. What were you doing that day?
Well, The Wrong Trousers as the second Wallace and Gromit film after A Grand Day Out, which is about 3 or 4 years before, I think. So I'd seen that and was eagerly anticipating this. I think I probably struggled a bit between choosing this or A Close Shave. This probably just pips it for me because it has a slightly better action sequence. They're both brilliant, but this is probably something just slightly better. And Christmas 93, I was 15, so home in my final year at high school. We had high school because I was in Norfolk and we had the American system. And I remember watching this, having previously enjoyed A Grand Day Out, but this was a pace up. And later on learning this was the first episode to be co-written by Bob Baker, the co-creator of K9. And the dialogue's just a bit easier. The physical comedy is just a bit more snappy. And the set pieces are just wonderful. And assuming everybody knows, but just in case, it's all stop motion, plasticine animation, which explains why it takes many, many years. Indeed, this year there will be the long-awaited sequel as Feathers McGraw will return.
Can you explain the plot very quickly of what happens in this one?
Wallace is an inventor, but because he seems to spend a vast amount of time, money and patents building convoluted contraptions and systems, he rarely has any money, so he always has to have a little sideline. And he's invented a pair of techno trousers for his dog Gromit. These will enable him to take him for a walk without actually going for a walk, but also enable you to walk up walls and do other variety of very useful things. But because they need extra cash, they have to take in a lodger. Now the lodger seems to be a penguin with balefully dead eyes. Dead eyes like a shark, or Wayne Rooney. He's clearly trouble, but Wallace is enamoured of him. He's charming, even though he never speaks. He flatters Wallace with wine and cheese. They boot Gromit out into the kennel, even though Gromit has a kennel and he's a dog, but he also has a room in the house as he's largely anthropomorphic. But Gromit knows there's something up, and it turns out that the penguin is, when he puts a rubber glove on his head, a perfectly disguised chicken called Feathers McGraw, who is there to steal an incredibly valuable diamond, which is inexplicably in the local provincial museum, and wants to use the techno trousers and somnambuling Wallace to steal, and then it's up to Gromit to try and save him.
Well, that went as well as could be expected, didn't it? Though I might have to make a small adjustment to the drop. A touch painful on re-entry. Cracking toast, Gromit.
And this all culminates in an incredible set piece.
It does, yes. And one of the things I use is the love of space. So we have a model train set chase sequence going 3 ways around furniture, and the speed it takes place means that I estimate Wallace's house is about 20 miles deep as they move at great speed through rooms, under furniture, between chair legs. Quite a lot of chair legs. It's a very large table, but the physical comedy, which is clearly taken from things like Buster Keaton's The General, just creates a perfect sense of timing and action and hilarity. And my favourite bit is when they run out of track but can't stop the train, so Gromit has to grab new track from a packet and hastily put it down while the train moves over it at an impossible speed, and it's killingly funny. It's joyous, and because of how long it takes to make, it's a perfect adventure, and it's special because it's taken so long, and it's only short because it's meticulously crafted and only available every few years because of the time and effort created, so you knew it was something special. And I think of all of them, and they're all good, this is my favourite.
Thank you, old friend. Many thanks indeed. That reward money paid off all our debts. No more lodgers or more trouble than they're worth.
Can you imagine going back to the 1970s and saying to Bob Baker, this is not the most famous dog you're ever going to write for?
He'd probably be quite grateful. I think the interesting thing for Bob Baker is these ideas that he always had. Like, I think the first draft of A Claws of Axos was a giant skull landing in Hyde Park, and it was like, have you ever seen Doctor Who? But, plasticine animation gives, we can have this amazing car chase sequence on a train through chair legs. We can do a scene, it's in A Close Shave, isn't it, where the bike goes off, splits with the sidecar plummets down a cliff, which is inexplicably near, and then Gromit can press some buttons and the sidecar becomes a plane with a porridge-filled gun, and Sheep can do a formation motorcycle chase, and all these things can happen from the mind of Bob Baker because physics is less of a problem in the animation world.
So the sequel to this story, Vengeance Most Foul, airs this Christmas Day. I take it you'll be watching it.
It's on after Doctor Who, so there's a double header of things I will be watching. Have you seen ITV's? It's just quiz shows.
They've just given up, haven't they?
Bullseye with Paddy McGuinness is not a rival to doing new Doctor Who, new Wallace and Gromit, new Gavin and Stacey, and whatever you think of it, new Mrs. Brown's Boys. It's phenomenally popular.
So's fascism, so yeah.
Yes, I'm not quite sure they're the same.
Okay, let's not bring the tone down, John. The Wrong Trousers takes us up to 5:30, and it's time for your next choice. Now, when you sent your original list over for your perfect night in, John, and I saw Doctor Who, I automatically assumed you were going to choose one of the new Christmas specials. But you've gone completely the other way. Can you explain why you've chosen what you've chosen?
Well, it's sort of a Christmas special. I don't think I could ever choose a new era Doctor Who over a classic era Doctor Who. I'm too set in my ways, and power to Toby Hadoke for doing that. I went back and listened to the old episodes of A Perfect Night In, partly because I wanted to enjoy them, but also to check that I wasn't going to choose the same things as Toby Hadoke. And he did choose a new Doctor Who, but I've chosen old Doctor Who, but because it's episodic, I've chosen the 1972 omnibus repeat of The Sea Devils, which I think was shown on the 27th of December 1972. Now, Doctor Who had a Christmas special repeat every year from 71 to 75, where they chose a serial from the previous season and, put it into an omnibus single episode, because obviously Doctor Who was serialised, and if you missed one single episode out of a 6-parter, you'd never seen that, and it was unlikely to get repeated. So this was a Christmas special, a chance to see an entire adventure, and I've chosen the second one they did, which is from the Sea Devils, because I think the Sea Devils works best as an edited cut down. It's quite a lot going on, but you can take quite a lot out. There's quite a lot of repetition going on there. Now, I'm pretty much all Doctor Who stories, as in the serials, would benefit from editing, but certainly the Pertwee 6-parters would. And I think this is a tighter paced, more enjoyable romp. It's at the exact halfway point of Jon Pertwee's time. So he's at the height of his powers. We have Pertwee both at his pompous best, when dealing with authority best, his sword fighting but being a bit of an arsehole best.
I'm going to get on to the Minister, and I'm going to ask him to seek approval for an immediate attack with nuclear weapons.
Well, that, sir, would be tantamount to murder.
Oh, come, Doctor, you speak as if these creatures are human. We're not going to hand over the world to a lot of lizards, you know.
You can share it with them, surely.
Oh, come, really, Doctor.
Look, let me make one final attempt to negotiate.
Well, you didn't get very far last time, did you?
The Sea Devils is full of some of my most favourite Pertwee moments. It's him bragging about Nelson, him sword fighting with Roger Delgado while eating a sandwich, and it contains possibly one of my favourite ever scenes in the Pertwee era, where the Master and the Doctor are locked up at the end, and the Doctor basically says to the Master, "Yeah, basically I've solved it all. I've destroyed all your plans, but good luck with that." And he thinks they're both gonna die. And the Master's got to get away, because that's part of the rules. The Doctor's never going to win through fully, and I always like that as well. And the fact this is a special moment happening because it's Christmas.
Once they see that the device works properly, they'll release me.
I very much doubt it. You see, before you reactivated it, I reversed the polarity of the neutron flow.
You did what? You realize what'll happen?
Oh, yes. You?
Well, there'll be a massive reverse feedback into their whole power system.
Exactly. In about 10 minutes from now, the whole place should go up. Enjoy your revenge.
For me, the two greatest things about the Sea Devils is, one, it's one of the few occasions where you see the monster running away in fear, which never happens very often. Yeah, that's it. It's uncanny. And the other bit is Donald Sumter, one of his early roles, and he has the greatest eye twitch I've ever seen on television.
I bumped into him once after a football match, as we're both West Ham fans. We'd come out after West Ham lost at home to Watford, and I was, oh my God, it's Rassilon stuck at the train station. And I don't want to bother famous people in when they're not on duty in civilian situations, but he was standing on his own at a platform waiting for it. So I just spoke to him, said hello, said I enjoyed his work, and left him to it. That was nice as well. Yeah, this also comes to mind, this story, because it's also a good example of when you start to burrow down into the great televisual landscape of, in this case 1972. You just find, as Paul McGann said, patterns in things that aren't there. So if I wanted to talk about that 1972 serial that featured Clive Morton as a slightly troubled governor of an island just off the coast, and also featured Royston Tickner as the factotum that brings people to and from the island, and used lots of stock footage of the Royal Navy, and thus in its credits thanked the Royal Navy and acknowledged their contribution to it as well. I would also have to say which one, because there's also the first series of Rogues Rock from Southern Television, which is one of Clive Morton's last things he did, which is about an island that's trying to cede from the UK. It's all very Brexity, when Brexity was jolly, rather than just when it was just racist and destroying the UK economy. But it's like, it's weird. You've got Royston Tickner in being exactly the same character. You've got Clive Morton being exactly. He's far more jolly, less broken, and doesn't get killed. But it's still a bizarre coincidence. I'd like to think that when they were making Rogues Rock, they watched, or thinking about making Rogues Rock, they watched the Sea Devils and we've gone, there's our guys.
OK, John, the Sea Devils Omnibus takes us up to 7 p.m, and we're really ramping up the Christmas vibes for your next choice. This is the point, John, where your Perfect Night In schedule actually mirrors reality, because this is actually going out on Christmas Eve, and it has gone out on Christmas Eve for, I think, 70 years now. So can you explain what it is?
Well, I'm an atheist, although I was brought up a Catholic, but many of the trappings of Christmas are, for some reason, religious, even if some of the origins of them are pagan rather than Christian. But I adore Christmas carols. It's invocative, and it's also a moment of peace in the excitement and the adrenaline or the excitement of comedy or high energy from Doctor Who or Wallace and Gromit, or the terror, as we'll get into later, or the laughter of the comedies. But a moment of peace and reflection is one of the most wholesome things, I think, about religion, and nowhere do I find that more perfectly exhibited than the 9 lessons on Christmas Eve. And when I think of these back now, the ones I've seen, the one in 2019 sticks in my mind, because the Tories had just won the election, the landslide, and Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. In a few months' time, the country would be in lockdown. And for some people, things would never be the same again. And there's just that moment of stillness where I thought, well, bad times are on the way, so I need to hold on to this. And they play possibly my favourite carol, which is Coventry Carol. It's a 17th century joy fest about the massacre of the innocents, and it's very beautiful and very moving. And I also think it's a still point with which to reflect. Now, you don't have to reflect with full belief in the Christian Gospels, but reflect on others and reflect on your own behaviours, and just a moment to take out of the hectic schedule, not only of life but of this TV night I'm curating, and just think about the lessons of charity and hope. And it was just a bit of light in the darkness.
So I know a lot of people probably have this on in the background while they're wrapping presents. It's sort of part of the general ambience of Christmas Eve. Do you actually sit down and watch it religiously, so to speak?
Yes. I mean, I might pour another drink during one of the lessons, but I'm mainly there for the choral singing. I'm also really into Gregorian chanting. I often write while listening to things like Gregorian chanting in Latin. I just find it very peaceful, and a sort of like thing, medieval and cloisters, I find very comforting. And it's King's College. It's a fantastic building, and I also feel an affinity for it because I love M.R. James, and he was provost for a time. So being in that magnificent space. It's also one step away from a ghost story, isn't it? You're in a large Gothic cathedral. You're being told some very good things. You're hearing some very emotive things, but there's also a nice frisson of danger.
And this whole festival of the 9 lessons and carols, I believe it's called, is designed specifically for broadcast. It didn't exist before the BBC started broadcasting it, I believe.
I must admit, I was surprised when I read that. It's perfect TV, and it's quite, I suppose, relatively cheap TV. You don't have to pay any of the actors. So in a way, it's reality. It's reality TV. It's an early bit of reality TV.
Would you like to attend in person? I know you can join a lottery, can't you?
You can. It's like Wimbledon, isn't it? But I think you have to queue so early, and I'd like it in theory, but then I'd be in Cambridge and I'd have to get home, and then it would ruin my perfect night of telly. So,
what is it live? Is it not like Jules Holland?
No, it's not. It's not quite like. It's on the day, but I think it happens that afternoon. I think it happens that afternoon. They don't record it in October or anything.
Once in Royal David City stood a lonely cattle shed.
Did you partake in carol singing when you were at school?
I remember having to do a reading in Swaffham. When I was in the fifth, so year 11, I think that is now. I was okay. I had sort of quite a good voice for presenting and things. I quite liked it at the time. I'm a terrible singer though. I can't sing.
Right, so you wouldn't go carol singing in reality?
Well, no, but also in Norfolk, like, unless you just go round the village, in which case everyone knows you anyway. Like, you're not going to get a bus to the next village and do carol singing there. So it would have to be a more organised event. I remember before I lived in Norfolk, I was in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex, and people would come round and sing then. But I found it really awkward. You just sort of stand there while someone sang at you. particularly if it was one person. Remember there being one person, and like my dad gave me 10p to give to this person. Please stop singing Once in Royal David City.
Okay, John, we've reached the halfway point of your perfect Christmas night in, and because it's Christmas, I'm going to bring back a format point that we haven't had on the show for quite a while, and that is, what's your favourite advert?
It's nothing to do with Christmas, but I got very good at identifying actors when I was young by identifying voices. And I will always remember the moment I realised that the Duckham's engine oil advert was voiced by Valentine Dial. The engine's choice. That's so evocative of a certain part of my life. It may have been shown at Christmas, but if you want to play a clip of Valentine Dial advocating the benefits of Duckham's Hypergrade.
Consider it done, John.
If an engine could choose its own oil, it couldn't choose a better oil than Duckham's Hypergrade. The engine's choice.
Welcome back to Perfect Night In. It's part 2 and it's 8 o'clock, and your next choice isn't very Christmassy.
Is it not very Christmassy?
Well, it's not set at Christmas, is it? It's sunshine and lovely weather.
They say I might as well face the truth, but I am just too long in the tooth. So I'm an OAB and weak need, but I'm not yet quite gone to see.
How could a Christmas special not be Christmassy? It's special. It's been made for Christmas. Okay, so my next choice is One Foot in the Algarve, the 1993 One Foot in the Grave.
1993 again.
Yep, we are. It was a good year for television, and not least of which possibly because of the impressionable age I was, 15, I think. Now, well, I will always be grateful for Russell T Davies for the immense skill of bringing Doctor Who back, and regardless of what anyone says, it was an overnight success. And having lived through seemingly a time when everyone would just tell me Doctor Who was much better before I was alive, to then live through the platinum age of Doctor Who, regardless of what your favourite era was, but to just be a fan at that stage was a privilege. And I've also become privileged to become friends with some of the people that worked on the series since, and hearing their stories of excitement to those first readings and those first meetings and get-togethers, to know they were at the start of something special must have been magical. But one thing I disagree with Russell T Davies on is the woke agenda. Joke, no. The one thing I disagree with Russell T Davies on is that all Christmas specials must be set at Christmas. No, the fact we have a special, do something special, is because it's being shown at Christmas. The characters in it do not have to know it's Christmas. So The Runaway Bride should not be set at Christmas. No one gets married on Christmas Day. I don't care. No one's going to that wedding. Like when I got married, people came from overseas. Like, we're doing it on Christmas Day. They'd all tell me to piss off and what an arrogant fool I was. Secondly, you try getting a black cab in Chiswick easily on Christmas Day. This isn't remotely Christmassy. Nothing about this screams Christmas, yet we have to believe it's Christmas. No. And you have the fact you having to shoehorn Christmas in. It doesn't matter. We've got an hour-long special. The story's on a slightly bigger scale. It's introducing Donna. All those things would have been fine. So, I didn't mind that big Christmas specials didn't have anything about Christmas in them. They were doing something extra. So here, in One Foot in the Algarve, Victor and Margaret go off to Portugal and have an adventure. And that's special, and that's why it's Christmas.
60 years old I'll be next month. 60 years of waiting for something nice to happen.
Will you let us out of here? We haven't done anything wrong. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me out there or what? Hello?
It's a story where Mrs. Warboys, played by Doreen Mantle, surely one of the greatest secondary characters in sitcom history, picks up with someone she's a divorcee, his partner's died. He's played by Edward D'Souza, the Man in Black, and Mark Corey, for you long-term Doctor Who fans, and they want to sort of go and see if there's a romance, but there's a lot riding on it. So Victor and Margaret agree to go, and they'll all have a holiday together, and then Mrs. Warboys can see if love will bloom. And in the meantime, there's various subplots about a boxer trying to find his spark, and Margaret feeling sort of the age and how society makes women of a certain sort of post-menopausal women feel with unrealistic beauty standards and what that does to self-worth. And David Renwick sort of creates and weaves all those Chekhov's guns of little things and little bits of information to culminate in a series of ridiculous and hilarious set pieces. And it's brilliant.
I suppose one Christmas element to it is that it includes a donkey. Let's talk about the donkey.
Yep, that all culminates in Victor holding a donkey as it pisses into someone's bath. But the layers you've had to get through to understand why that's happened and how it's perfectly understandable, so that the viewer has every sympathy with Victor and you see the social situation unfolding, and you then have to do a jump cut because no actual reaction would justify your expectations of that as well. The payoff for when they think they're in a police cell. As well, the fact they go to a bar to stop on the way, and Victor's in bad Portuguese when he tries to look for a room for the night, and all he actually does is pimp out Mrs. Warboys. But it culminates in possibly my single favourite piece of sitcom magic or scene. It's when they think Mrs. Warboys has fallen to her death over a cliff or it's lost at sea and she's fallen in the water, and there's just two bits. One is the Coast Guard with a heavy Portuguese accent speaking through a loudspeaker going, Mrs. Warboys, which the incongruity of it is just is a perfect setup. And there's this horrific build up to the next scene where they're taken to a morgue, and this is a gentle sitcom. Now there are elements of danger in One Foot in the Grave because Renwick's very good at that. Look at Renwick's, his other great success is Jonathan Creek, which I was very close to putting in. They're marvellous, or at least the early ones certainly were excellent. But death and certainly the spectre of death. You hear someone dying off screen, or there'll be tragedy within that as well. But just to see Mrs. Warboys' corpse, this is going to be horrible. And it's brace yourself, and it's working through a double because the coroner doesn't speak English, so it's through a translator, and it just said the shark bit her foot off, and you're like, bloody, she's been mutilated. Oh my, look, what, you can't show what this is so and the payoff when they open the drawer and it's just a foot. The shark bit her foot off, but that's all that's left, is a work of genius.
Foi pescador de poços que o trouxe. Encontrou-nos sem destinos num barracuda morto. O meu trabalho é tentar descobrir a quem pertence o pé.
He say a fisherman from Porches found it in the stomach of a dead barracuda. Now I try to find out who it belongs to.
Find out who it belongs? What is this? A new version of Cinderella by David Lynch? Well, it's upset enough as it is without you shoving these grisly atrocities like this underhand.
Just a minute. That's not her foot.
One Foot in the Algarve takes us up to 9:30, and your next choice, John, changes the mood completely. Okay, John, you've chosen the Stone Tape. For anyone unfamiliar with this, what is the Stone Tape?
The Stone Tape is a 90-minute drama that was broadcast on Christmas Day on BBC Two in 1972. It's a play by Nigel Neal, best known for the Quatermass serials and for the BBC's first TV adaptation of 1984. It's not a ghost story for Christmas, even though it is a ghost story for Christmas. But it isn't one of the Ghost Story for Christmas strand that Lawrence Gordon Clark did. Indeed, the one for that year was broadcast the day before. I mentioned it earlier. It's A Warning to the Curious. Chris Morahan, the former BBC director, was made head of plays in 1972. And one of the first things he did was commission Nigel Neal to write an up-to-date ghost story, almost like in opposition to what Lawrence Gordon Clark was doing in general features. And indeed, the following year, he would move Ghost Story for Christmas out of general features into drama. And then Lawrence Gordon Clark wouldn't have the complete control. There'd be a producer, etc., in that as well. So you can see that the Stone Tape was almost the antithesis of A Ghost Story for Christmas. And that just explains, I think, how different the televisual landscapes were. If you, like BBC 4, put on something now almost in opposition to Woman of Stone by Mark Gatiss that goes out on Christmas Eve, they'll be seen as almost, working in silos and not really being, not having a consistent schedule. But there were lots of these things going on at the time, and drama was doing things, and as General Features had moved more into documentary drama through things like Arena and Omnibus, so it wasn't that unusual that General Features would do a short film. Essentially they were short films, whereas Stone Tape was television in studio, and indeed very rarely, as it's even the location work is shot on videotape, shot on an OB unit, not on film as pretty much everything else was. Directed by Peter Sasti, probably now best known for his work on Hammer, and stars Michael Bryant and Jane Asher. And it centres around a research team from a company called Ryan Electronics, who are searching for a new recording medium to get a competitive advantage ahead of Japan, which is seen as the market leader. As they get there, they find out that one of the records room won't be touched by the workmen because there's a ghost in it. And the interesting thing is the ghost isn't really the point. Everyone sees or experiences otherwise the ghost in the first sort of 15 minutes. The interesting thing is what you do then, because it's decided that the ghost is clearly a playback of something that happened years before, and therefore the stone is a recording medium, the stone tape. So wanting to utilise this, the research team try and research how they can extract recording from a stone with tragic consequences.
I'm going to chuck the lot at it.
Do you mean go after it with electronics and then...
Find out exactly what makes it... Well, it doesn't tick. It patters its feet and screeches. Everything we get, Jill's going to program in the computer.
Analyse a spook,
Well, let's say it's a mass of data, waiting for a correct interpretation. No one's ever managed it before. I think we might.
Can you spare the time?
No choice, Collie. It's got us stuck.
I watched this for the first time very recently for this podcast, and I've got to say, I found it really disturbing. God knows what it must have been like watching this in 1972.
In many ways, I think it's even more disturbing now because it's on videotape, so it's aged far less well. And there are unique qualities safe to film, particularly 16mm film. Particularly the green, I find the texture of the green in that grain quite sinister. But in a similar way, for something that's about very analogue, as we see with the recording equipment that the team are using, there's something appropriate about watching the Stone Tape on 2-inch videotape. And I think that's part of the slightly hauntological quality. But whenever anyone says hauntological, that when they talk about something they want to make in music, what they mean is a bit like the Stone Tape.
And the Stone Tape's just been released on Blu-ray, and you do the commentary track on that, I believe. And how did that come about?
It came about in the same way as me also doing the Legacy documentary on it as well. I was asked by Sarah Appleton, who was producing the disc for 101 Films. She was asked to do the documentary. She hadn't seen it, but she'd worked on the Ghostwatch release, and they wanted something similar, but she wasn't familiar with the Stone Tape as she was Ghostwatch, so brought me on board to nerd out and bring in people like Jane Asher, and spoke to Glenys Johns, who did the most of the actual work for the Radiophonic Workshop on the sound. Although it's credited to Desmond Briscoe, it's under Desmond Briscoe, but she does a lot of the practical work. Talked to people like Peter Strickland and Matthew Graham, who did the radio version as well. Howard David Ingham talks about the origins of Stone Tape theory, because although it's called Stone Tape theory because of the Stone Tape, the idea of residual energy in objects predates Nigel Neal's work, as well as fans of the production like Stephen Volk and Mark Gatiss. And then I did the commentary with Sean Hogan, the filmmaker, who's just had one of his short films released by Shudder as like a ghost story for Christmas. So a nice plug if you haven't bought it yet. The Stone Tape is now currently available on Blu-ray.
There must be a decay.
What? What decays, Jill?
Whatever's stored in the stone, the recording. Otherwise, it'd be like perpetual motion, an impossibility. It would have to corrode and lose definition. Over a long enough period, it would have to. But then if you boosted it... Collie, I think that's what he's done.
Boosted?
Some deep-level record. Much older. So old
And can you remember the first time you saw this? Was it an immediate impact on you?
It was. I saw it relatively late. I didn't see it until about 20 years ago. So when it came out on DVD. And in isolation, you sort of think, what the hell? And it disturbed me in a couple of ways. One, because of it's just an assault on rationality. And the ghost isn't the point. It's what the ghost represents. And the idea that if you could wipe it, then like a tape, if you hear, my wife was in a band and she would say, look, listen to that, you can hear a ghost recording, i.e. a previous thing, I think you've recorded over, you can hear the sound, but that whether if it just comes as a loud bit on the previous recording and a silence in your current recording, you could hear ghost sounds. But the idea of when they accidentally wipe the ghost of the maid, something else appears, and it's faded, and it's badly defined because it's ancient. And then when the computer's printing out and it's like 7,000 years and they're like, it's nonsense, what is this? And one thing again, and when I'm not disagreeing with Russell T Davies, I'll disagree with M.R. James, and he says a ghost has to have a tangible time. You need to be able to, but it can do and be very effective from that, as in you need a frame of reference for the ghost. But I find the idea of a ghost from the ancient past that you have no frame of reference for and you can't explain, and I don't think Neil ever had any idea what it was just ancient and awful, and you've just then got pure animal terror as Jill runs from it. And, some people, and it's fair enough, find, Peter Brock a bit much as a character and think Michael Bryan overplays it. But Michael Bryan's just playing the biggest arsehole he possibly can in a real sort of boys' environment. And like, yeah, come on, and it's a bit macho and it's a bit silly as well. And they badly lose sight of what they're doing. And there's no hero figure there like Quatermass or, like a Doctor Who, an X Factor to come in and say, this is what you're doing. There isn't one of those characters, and there's only here tragedy and death.
It's very bleak ending.
It is, but isn't it effective? Oh, that final sound of the scream, and now there's a new layer. And now it's someone we know, and now she haunts the place, even though she's dead.
Help me! Peter!
Jill!
Stone Tape takes us up to 11 p.m, and your penultimate choice, John, is A Ghost Story for Christmas.
Another plug is I'm writing a book on the history of the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas, as in starting with the Lawrence Gordon Clark ones, and we'll look a bit at the scene setting of things like Miller's Whistle and I'll Come to You and what happened in the 21st century. So it would be remiss of me not to have an episode of A Ghost Story for Christmas. The one I've chosen is Luke Watson directed A View from a Hill, from 2005, the first one of the first proper dramatisation of the 21st century, and it's written by Peter Harness, who's written some excellent Doctor Who's, and I've chosen this one partly because it was the first one to come back. Now, in 2005, when this is from, something happened to change the television landscape. Doctor Who came back.
It's never far away, is it?
No, it isn't. And suddenly things were happening that wouldn't have happened before, and risks were being taken. But this was seen of almost pastiche. But Richard Fell at BBC 4 was wanted to bring things back, and you had like repeats of ghost stories from other times in the year. They repeat the 1990 Green Man in 2001. It's the first time also, I think it's 2004, that Miller's Whistle I'll Come to You is shown as part of Christmas, and it never now really gets away from being a sort of proto Ghost Story for Christmas. But here is the first new one. Now you can see there's not enough money. It clearly needs a train scene, and there isn't enough money for the train scene. But Harness takes so much of sort of energy and relationships and isolation and plays that to the full and creates a perfect atmosphere. And one of the reasons I choose it's not just because it's the first one back and the first one, say, new I could see for myself, but also I think it's the perfect example of taking a story and changing it for the strength of the medium you're presenting it on. In the original story of View from a Hill, there's the haunted binoculars. There's Baxter's haunted binoculars, and as Fanshawe looks through them, he sees through the past. He sees what the church looked like, or the abbey looked like in its glory. Peter Harness takes it that bit further, because when Fanshawe goes here, he starts drawing and he starts walking around, and he walks inside the church, and then he sees a figure, and the figure sees him. And he puts his glasses down in shock, and of course there's no one there. He's standing in the ruins. But they've seen him, and they're coming for him. And that's chilling concept. And it's visual because we're working in telly. And it's perfect. And he gets 40 minutes, slightly longer than Mark Gatiss gets now. And you just get that time where Luke Watson can sort of do shots of the forest, shots of the sky. We'll have a bird circling. We can just build atmosphere. And another thing they do is change the nature of the Squire and Fanshaw's relationship. In the original story, they're old friends. Here, he's old friends with Fanshaw's boss at the university, and Fanshawe is of a lower class than the Squire, and it just increases the isolation a bit. And Pip Torrance, who plays the Squire, is adept at playing upper class gits, and like the way that the upper class sort of mock learning, mock expertise. And when Fanshawe says indignantly, I am a doctor, really, he says, drawing on a cigarette, must get you to have a look at my feet. And it's brilliant.
Oh, there's Wanston. Used to be a monastery, once upon a time. To the north, Lambston, some Civil War things. Was it Roman? I can't remember. My father would have known. Gallows Hill, and below it the Coach and Horses. Good pint, good steak and ale pie, and somewhere over there, Fulnaker Abbey, or what's left of it. That should tickle your fancy.
It has quite a bleak ending, but quite a questionable ending as well, similar to Warning to the Curious. And I'm so glad and so privileged to have witnessed some of the more recent ones being made as part of Adorable Media's productions of them that Mark Gatiss writes and directs. But I'll always come back to this one as when I knew it would work in the 21st century as well, and because it was the first one I was able to experience as broadcast.
Where does this connection between ghosts and Christmas even come from?
Prehistory, pretty much. There's always been stories about the dead, and to tell a story at the coldest time of the year, when death seems closest, when the fields are dead, when the plants aren't growing, when nothing grows, trees are bare, when things look bleak and death is close. And when you would, prehistory, we do ancestor worship. If you were only going to be alive for a few decades, death there was a constant memento mori, if you like. Into the Middle Ages, when, morality of death, you have to live a good life because otherwise you'll spend eternity in hell. And the idea of Christmas and morality, the trappings now come from A Christmas Carol. And then they were sort of harnessed by people like M.R. James. But that's the Western thing as well. In Japan, ghost stories are for the summer because they chill you and keep you cool.
I'm surprised Doctor Who hasn't done a Christmas special which is sort of ghost orientated. It seems like a no-brainer.
I mean, it has done a ghost story at Christmas. It was just broadcast in April. Mark Gatiss' first one, The Unquiet Dead, isn't it? It was repeated that Christmas as well.
We must stop talking about Doctor Who.
It invades everything.
OK, we've reached the final programme of your perfect Christmas night in, John. It's 11:40.
I thought I'd end on a light-hearted comedy, but instead I chose a League of Gentlemen Christmas special. It's made like an anthology, like an old Amicus anthology film. So there are 3 stories with the overlinking arc of the church in Weston Vasey at Christmas. So the 3 stories are: 1, there's a marriage in trouble because of a husband's love of line dancing, and so the wife joins a sort of coven, and a sort of Eyes Wide Shut, sort of with masks and things, to basically create magic, so he would not do as well at line dancing, and thus pay more attention to her. But once you get involved, things don't always work out as you want them to. It's a great example of where they create very sinister imagery, which is then beautifully undermined by the comedy of, like, when you can clearly identify all the characters under the mask because you know them from the series. Is just very good.
Especially Pauline.
Yes. Yes.
I've got an appointment. You're late. I know, I have to go and get this.
The mask is inappropriate. Remove it, please.
Sorry, it was either this or Spider-Man, and I thought...
What's your problem, then?
Sorry? What is the cause of your sadness and pain? Oh, well, it's not pain exactly, it's just My husband, Charlie, he's taken up this thing. It sounds silly to say it now, but line dancing? Oh, my Ron's mad on that.
The second one is a vampire story, which centres on Hare Lip, the one joke character played by Steve Pemberton. One, he's got a terrible pun for a name, and the joke is just he's gay and makes inappropriate innuendos all the time. But this is a vampire story from Germany, like an origin story for Hare Lip, which plays misdirection very well and doesn't go in quite the way you think it would, as well as giving Mark Gatiss an opportunity to play the vampire from Salem's Lot.
And creepy carol singers.
Yes. Nice counterpoint to Carols from Kings. And the third one is the reason that Dr. Chinnery is so awful as a vet, why he's cursed, as in the history of his family. So it's essentially a remake of The Monkey's Paw, but with the monkey's testicles instead. The monkey's knackers, as it's called, which is also one of those things where you have to take something so phenomenally immature deadly seriously. And it ends on the most horrific thing. It's basically he destroys a circus and all the animals in the circus, which of course is killingly funny. And it plays with its subject well, because I think The League of Gentlemen are the best example, where you take horror comedy is really, really tough because they're two highly subjective things, that which you find funny and that which you find scary. And to land both of them, you can do a comedy homage, like Young Frankenstein is not scary, but it's a lovely homage to universal horror. But you're not genuinely scared by it as well. The League of Gentlemen does some things that are genuinely horrific, but also killingly funny, and they take the tropes and can play with them well, particularly when the three stories that centre on what this person is telling the vicar, and then she's not listening each time they come back, and it's, oh, sorry, what were you saying? And it was so funny.
It's Tom Selleck. This was due 3 days ago.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, a bit of trouble at home.
What's this the third king's carrying?
Tweed. By Lonthoric.
No.
Well, Stella flushed the murder down the lav.
Give it here.
It also has one of the most disturbing endings to a TV show I've ever seen.
Very disturbing endings. Following on from the Stone Tape and A Ghost Story for Christmas, we have three incredibly down endings.
Yeah, explain what happens at the end of this.
Well, as you probably know, the vicar in the League of Gentlemen is on the cynical side. So there's sort of a reverse psychology going on. Something not dissimilar to say, Blackadder's Christmas Carol, where the joke is, unlike in the Dickens' original story, Blackadder goes from being a nice person to the horrible person we know. So when we meet the vicar from the League of Gentlemen, we know them as a highly unpleasant person. When they have the youth theatre comes round, she refers to it as AIDS in a van, which is, my God, that is one of the most offensive things I've ever heard. So this clearly starts off as you sort of expect, with the Christmas being a highly cynical time for the vicar. But over the course of the story and the various tales that have woven in, Bernice his mood improves and she's learned something and will be a better person. But then there's the callback to the earlier Father Christmas that we saw, that Bernice hit is revealed to be Papa Lazaro, like, hello, Dave, who we also learn that kidnapped Bernice's mother as a child, thus sort of breaking Bernice as a person. And then it ends with Bernice being kidnapped by Papa Lazaro and his carnival friends. And it's just, yeah, it's so horrible. But it's very funny.
You're my wife now.
At least we finish on something very Christmassy.
We do, yes, yeah. And what's more Christmassy than kidnapping?
And this is how Jon Dear's perfect night in at Christmas shapes up. It all begins when Wallace and Gromit encounter Master Thief Feathers McGraw in the wrong trousers at 5. That's followed by a special omnibus edition of Doctor Who and the Sea Devils from Christmas 1972. At 7 p.m, it's time for Carols from Kings, before professional grouch Victor Meldrew unbelievably finds himself with one foot in the Algarve at 8. At 9:30, Jane Asher is tormented by Nigel Neal's The Stone Tape, because nothing says Happy Christmas like Jane Asher falling to her death off some wobbly steps. And the festive spookiness continues in A Ghost Story for Christmas at 11. Our evening concludes with even more scares as the League of Gentlemen's Christmas special serves up a veritable feast of Yuletide yarns. And that's Jon Dear's Perfect Night In at Christmas, ho ho ho. And mine is the last voice you will ever hear.
Okay, Jon, thanks for sharing that perfect night in with us. Now, before you go, if you could choose anyone to spend this perfect night in with, who would you choose?
Well, as it's a fantasy and I can choose anything, there seems little point in choosing my wife and my mother, because that's who I will spend Christmas Eve with as well. So without wanting to be too maudlin, I will choose my best mate Paul, who died just over 4 years ago. And he wasn't a particular archive telly fan. He watched Star Trek and bought it on Blu-ray so he could laugh at all the shit effects, which isn't really entering into the spirit of it. No, I'm happy with him slagging Star Trek off. I think it's crap. So it's not like he would sit there enjoying, or he'd sit there going, isn't the ending to the Stone Tape shit, because what the hell are they doing, and why is she disappearing like that? And I'll be like, that's CSO! And he'd laugh so much at a sea devil running away, and I'd enjoy getting cross with him. And then he'd laugh at me, and we'd both have a drink. And I hugely miss being able to do that. So I would have Christmas with my friend Paul Woodgate.
Thanks, Jon. Merry Christmas.
And incidentally, a happy Christmas to all of you at home.
I reversed the polarity of the neutron flow.